Hello and welcome back to another Oxygen XML live experience. My name is Alim Belu and I will be your host for today's live event, the start of our new live instructional webinar series titled Transforming Data Documents to PDF using CSS. The first entry of the series, Page Definitions, Cover Page, and the PDF Metadata, was created for the people who want to publish their data books and maps in PDF but are struggling with the process. And being a novice is never easy. We all know this. And by understanding this, my colleague Julian Lecor, software developer at Syncrosoft, the company that creates the Oxygen suite of products, prepared this 1-hour crash course to teach you step by step how to customize your PDF publications using CSS and make them compliant with all your company's documentation requirements in a quick and easy fashion with no previous experience needed from your part. Now, before I'll give control to Julian, let me give you some useful information about today's webinar. As always, all of our events are being recorded, so today's event makes no difference. After the webinar comes to an end, the recording will be made available on the event page on our site, oxygenxml.com, along with the slides and samples of Julian's presentation, and also the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel titled Oxygen XML. Another important aspect is that as we go along, we encourage you to ask us questions by using the questions panel from the GoToWebinar interface. Dan Capriuara, one of the founders of Syncrosoft, will help us by answering your questions in real time. Well, I finished my piece, so let me introduce you to Julian Lecor. Hello, Julian.
Hello, Aline. Hello, everyone. So let's start today's presentation. Today we will start the series of webinars about data customization in PDF by customizing pages, cover pages, and PDF metadata. So as an introduction, we will see what is data maps, what are data maps and book maps. So for users who already knows about data, data is composed by multiple document types, which are linked in a map, which is called the data map, which is the default container for all the data documents. Another type of map that can be used especially for books or technical documentation can be the book map, which is slightly different than the default data map in the sense it already includes some of the book-oriented contents, which is, for example, the front matter. We can define some parts, chapters. We can define appendix. We can also define indexes, for example, etc., etc. The scope of those two documents are to organize all the topics into a hierarchy or into subgroups, and most important, to keep relations between them. Are they child, parents, parts, chapters, etc. This is a small schema explaining what and how the book map works. I take the book map as an example because it's the most complete one. So for example, if we take a book map, it's composed, for example, of metadata, front matter, which can contain the table of content, for example. We can define chapters that can be already a topic or only just a chapter title. After that, we found a lot of topic references, which are leading to some topics or tasks or references that are all the topics and or the topics types, sorry. And at the end of the book map, you can find a backmatter, which can contain, for example, a glossary, an index list, etc. As for the book map, all the topics can be composed by some titles, prologues, some metadatas, a body, some steps, paragraphs, list, table, etc., etc., which are in fact the real content of my books. To continue in this way, in DITA, we have something called the document object model, which is the how data is discomposed, how the types are discomposed. So here you can find some element names, for example, as I said before, paragraphs, tables, lists, images, etc. And if I go to Oxygen, for example, and open a generated document using DITA, I can find that, in fact, during the process of transformation, DITA is converting, in my case, because I am using the PDF HTML5 document, my intermediary document is an HTML5 document, which contains a lot of classes, which are in fact the conversion of the original DITA class and DITA element to an HTML element with a specific class. So why DITA is discomposing these elements in class is only for keeping the specific way of working for the specific element. For example, indicating that it's a paragraph, to make sure that in the final output, the document will be interpreted, the part of the document will be interpreted as a paragraph. Also, the class attribute contained in those elements can be split in two parts. As you may see here, we have, for example, topic/p, p standing for paragraph. The first part of the class attribute is in fact the module type. We can find three main module types in the DITA world. Sorry. The map module, the topic module, and the domain modules. And the second part of the class attribute is the element type. For example, here as we have a paragraph, it's the P, the simple P element, which matches, in fact, the original paragraph I can find, for example, in a DITA topic, which is the P element. To continue, DITA also introduces an inheritance part, which means that a class can be composed by multiple couple of module type element type. For example, if I take the code phrase element, I may understand from this attribute that in fact it comes from the topic classic phrase element, but it's in fact a child of this main domain. And in fact, it's more specifically from the programming domain of DITA and from the code phrase element, which is in fact the code phrase element. I just need to understand from this that the code phrase element is a child of the phrase element. So it contains all the kind of stuff that the phrase can be, but it's more specific to be used in a programming domain document. So all this explanation to show you, in fact, that this will be, in fact, the target we will use in our documents to match using CSS the different elements. You can use the element name, or you can use more specifically the class element. Why I said more specifically is because in our transformation, as we are using HTML5 as an intermediary file, HTML does not have as many elements as DITA. And this is why in the HTML document, you find all the elements marked with the class attribute, because if we have paragraphs, images, tables, some of them, maybe not those ones because they are sufficiently specific, but some of them could lost the original element and just become a classic HTML div, which can lead, if you are using this div element for your CSS, you can lose the control of your CSS because the CSS will be applied on much more content that you in fact want your content to be matched. For example, on my paragraphs. So what we recommend is always, if possible, use the class element because it's more specific and you will be sure that this will be the only match of your CSS. In this webinar, we will also deal with some CSS at rule, and especially the page CSS rule, which is used as its name says. It's used for define pages, for example, for defining sizes, margins, etc. We will use it for defining our cover page, and we will add inside this rule some background CSS properties. And the page CSS rule also defines what is called the page margin boxes, which is in fact the representation of the page's headers and footers. So here is a more detailed schema of the page margin boxes. As you can see here, in fact, in the middle, this will become my PDF content area. So all my text from my original topic will be displayed in this area of my page. And the page margin boxes are all around the page area, and this will contain some extra information which can already be defined in the CSS and which is usually added in the PDF contents. For example, the page numbers, the chapter names, for example, or the publication title, etc. So to continue with this page CSS rule, we will use after in the webinar. Other thing that you can define inside this rule element are the sub rules for the page, for some specific page of your document. For example, the front page, which is the first page you will encounter when you open a PDF document. You can specifically define a chapter if you want something different only for the main chapter page. That is in fact the page you are entering in when you are at the start of a chapter. The one saying chapter 1 with the title of the chapter, for example. You can also define one specific page for the indexes. For example, if you want to be a 2-column display for your indexes, or you want a specific page size, or you want different margins, etc. Another thing you can define in the page CSS rule is the pseudo classes, especially the first, to explain that you want only the first encountered page to look like a specific CSS. And you can also define some specific rules and properties for your left pages, which mean the odd pages of your documents, and for the right pages, which are the even pages of your document. And as a note, all these rules, the pseudo classes, can be mixed. So you can say, I want my first left page to look like this, and I want my first right page to look like that. We will see all these things a little later in the webinar. I will detail all these parts. So before we start and we enter in this document, maybe some of you already seen that I will use a bookmap, which will talk about space exploration. The transformation I will use is the PDF using HTML5 and CSS will be used, and I also will use a publishing template just for showing the most complete way of defining the the transformation by using a publishing template. You can also use just the parameters available inside the transformation, but for making a more complete example, I will take the publishing template one. So I already created my publishing template, which, as you can see, is a short one. I just add a name, a small logo as a preview image, and I just linked my main CSS page as the resource, as the main CSS I will be applied on all my transformation, which at this moment is just to import and nothing at the moment. So it's just clean. The document will look as the default transformation. It's just to be prepared. And I will use a cover page, which is an SVG file. My cover page will be an SVG file. So I will use the following page, which is an SVG file, because the advantage of the SVG format is, as we are using a vector image and not a fixed image, it can be used for multiple page sizes. So for my example, I will use one single page size, but maybe some of you will need to create the same document in different formats for different uses. And in fact, you can reuse the same cover page and just adapt it to the new format without changing anything in the original image. So before starting with our example, a small question. I want to know what is your level of CSS. So I will let you a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, to see how many of you already know about CSS and how many of you doesn't know at all. Okay, so I think we have a quite huge majority of users which have a basic knowledge of the CSS syntax, which is quite great for what we will do today. For the others, don't be afraid. This can look really complicated at the first sight, but you will see that in fact in really few lines you will succeed to do something enough for a lot of uses. So we will continue with a second question before we start is, are you familiar with XPath inside XML documents? So let you a few seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Okay, so I think we obtained something quite stable. It seems that we have two groups. One we doesn't know about XPath, so I will give a more detailed explanation about what is XPath a little later in the webinar. And for the other people which maybe have heard about XPath, it will be a good refresh, and it could be sufficient if you know about basic queries of XPath for our example today. So let's start now with the first part. What do we want to know and what do we want to do today? First, we want to define a specific page. So I want, for example, because all my company is using a specific page size for all my documentation, or maybe a client is asking for a specific required page size. So the first thing we will do using the page rule I detailed before is to simply set the page size and add a page margin. For our example, I will explain that I will use the size A4, which is a classic page size for a lot of printers or documents in everyday life. And I will add a simple margin, which will be displayed along my page area, which will be 2 centimeters margin. So the first thing I need to do is just to go into my main CSS and to define the rule I had in the slide. So I want my document to be A4 and to have a 2 centimeters margin. I can already transform my document, so I will duplicate my basic transformation and I will set my custom template, which is the template I detailed before. So here is my new logo. So I know that I will use my main CSS file and I can simply run the transformation. And after the transformation will finished, I can see that my document will have a page which is different than the default page of Oxygen printing, which is normally the US letter format. So I will not have the US letter, but instead I will use the A4. So let's wait a little to the transformation. Here it is. And if I can open already my document properties and I see that the page size is not the US letter, which is normally 8.5 or 11 inch, but it's a little bigger because A4 is a little bigger than US letter. And I normally should have a 2 centimeter margin inside my document. So this means that if I print already this document, it should be formatted using the A4 pages. So it will enter exactly like this in my A4 pages from my printer. So let's continue. Now we have the default pages, the basic pages. As you may see, it's only 4 lines to define a pages. Now we will define a cover page. So how to define the cover page? So now I will use and add to a page rule. I will add, as I explained before, the front page because I want only my front page to have the cover on it. I don't want the picture to be displayed on every pages of my document. Sorry. So the 4 background properties that you have to use to define the documents are these 4 ones. So let's go to the front page one. I will use, so these are the rules and the property I will use. So the first one, the background image one, is in fact the URL to the document I will use, as my CSS is positioned in this folder. I simply had to say that the URL of the cover page is just the file close to it. If you are not sure about this, but your document is in Oxygen, you can simply drag and drop the file inside the CSS. The URL will be automatically converted. The second point I will use is the background position property. This in fact says that where my image should start inside the document. If your cover page covers the whole page, the default position should be centered because it has to be the page, the center of the page will be used as the fixing point for the cover. So the cover should be equally splitted on the left side and on the right side. So normally like this, the image will not have some maybe blanks or should be maybe cropped by my PDF viewer. The third rule is the background repeat property. This is just used to avoid the cover page. If the cover page is not enough for my whole page, by default, the CSS processor repeat the image until the cover is fully covered. So like this, I'm sure my document will not processed maybe too many cover pages and cover images to create my cover. And the last one, the last rule, is the background size. As I want my cover to occupy the whole page, I will simply define that my cover is 100% of each width and height positions. So if I go back to my rules, so now I define the cover page, I can, as I did for the first part, saying that now I can print my document using my new cover page. And now you will see that after the document is generated, I obtain a simple cover page, which is the SVG I showed you before, and it will be on my whole front page, but on none of the other pages. So here is my cover page, and my other pages are not impacted by my first page. Now you see another problem. I have this title, which is quite centered, and black. My problem now is that I want this title to be positioned in another place to be easier to read, and I will make it white to be a more bigger contrast with my cover page. So we will continue and see now how we can customize the main publication title. So my book title, which is Space Exploration, needs to be matched in order to be white colored and to be positioned differently inside my document. So the rule for this will be different than the page rule I used before. I will simply define a new CSS selector, which used the class I explained before. So the class I will match in this case is the front page title element from the front page group module. And I will define it as following. I will make it white. I will make it bigger than the default font size, and I will position it using margin and padding. So to be in a little more on the right part and a little more down on my cover. So let's go back to my Oxygen application. I will simply use the rule. So why, you may ask why I know, where I know that the rule will match the class front page, the module front page and the element front page title. The thing is, I simply need to go onto the merged.html document, which is used and recommended for CSS debugging. And the only thing I need to do is to find my front page title, which is here. And if I open it in author mode of Oxygen, you may see that the CSS already applied on my document, and my title is already changed in white and in a bigger font. If you are not sure about the correct class to use here, you can simply open the document inside your web browser, or you can, if you prefer, you can also use the Oxygen author mode. You can, or doing the inspect styles on my document and check using the CSS inspector and see that a lot of rules used by this document have the class front page title, or the front page. This is the main element of this one. And if you prefer using the web browser, you can use also here the inspect element and simply check using the inspector, the browser inspector. Here is the Firefox inspector, and check that we have a front page element, and inside this front page element you will find as the child the front page title element. So if I select and put my CSS selector here, I will be sure that all content included inside this element will be you will use, sorry, my CSS. So if I define back my rule, so I will set it white and go back into my Oxygen, I will see that after a small refresh, now my title is in white. If I go into my browser, my title should disappear because white on white is no more visible. But I will see that staying on my front page title element, that the new rule coming from the front page CSS I defined before says that it will use the color white, the font size bigger, and another positioning. So let's get back to Oxygen and see also the result inside the final PDF. So every time you don't know about a class, as it is, it can be hard to find the exact container of the element. I recommend 100% opening the merged HTML document in author mode if you prefer Oxygen. In the browser, if you are a common user of web browsers, maybe you know already the console of browsers, the inspect styles, etc. And here you can see that back in my PDF, now my title is no more over my image. It's slightly on the right side. It's bigger than the default one, and it's in white. So I can continue and move to the next part. So now we will start customizing our headers and footers. So the first thing I can do when I am customizing my headers and footers is to check what page margin box I want to use to add my content in. Another thing you have to know is that we already define some string sets, which are CSS properties containing for the whole document some content. So for example, we have the map title, which is the publication title. We define the part title if your document contains part, which in my case, I don't have. And we also define the chapter titles. So what I mean by string set and default string sets is that if I go back to my merged HTML document, by selecting the topic title, I will see here that from all the CSS applied on my document, one of them include a property called string set. The string set in this case is called chapter title, and it's composed by a pipe, the counter of the chapter, which is the number of the current chapter, 1 in this case, a hyphen, and the content of the topic title element, which is this one. So I will have the introduction text because this is the child of my topic title element. If you prefer doing this in Oxygen, you can do exactly the same content. I will select my whole title, going in inspect styles, and I will see that I have a string set called chapter title, which is composed by pipe counter chapter dash and the content of my title, which is introduction in this case. Why this is not in my topic title? Because this is created by another rule, which is a before rule. So it's not directly inside the correct, the original topic. As you may see here, the original topic is just called introduction. But we already had some CSS before rules adding some extra content, which is not included in my string sets. We can also, as you have seen with the counter chapters, we have also some counters which are defined by default in our PDF documents. For example, the page counter, which is simply as its name says, it's the counter saying which is the current page of the document. You can have one for the chapters, you can find one for the figures, for the tables, etc., etc. You have a whole detailed list of all the counters and string sets inside our documentation. So I wrote a link here, but you can also use the search bar of the Oxygen website and documentation to move from one topic to another. So to go in this part, we will add the first examples of what I called the page margin boxes. So what I want to do, for example, is to I will define the simplest one. So the simplest one, I simply want my pages to have in the bottom center, so in the bottom part of the pages of the margin, just a simple dash, the counter of the page, and another dash in the bottom center part. I defined the same rule for the right pages, and I can go on and transform my document. So I just add those rules. So the bottom left, the bottom center part of the left pages and of the right pages. So both even and odd pages will have on their bottom part the page number between dashes. So we will check inside our PDF document. If I go, for example, in the second chapter, you may see here now I have, as I defined in my CSS, the page number between dashes. So it continues until the end of the document, 10, 11, extra, extra. Another thing I can do, which is slightly the same part but a little more complicated, is to define new string sets or reuse the predefined ones. So in my case, for now, I only used the counter, the page counter. So now we will go in Oxygen and, for example, add two more rules. So the first rule I will add will be those ones. I want all my chapters. So I just want the first page of the chapter. So which is the page containing the number of the chapter and the title. For both left and right pages, I want them to display on their left or right part, depending on if there are odd or even pages, the map title, which is in fact the name of my book maps, Space Exploration. So this will be my first modification. The second modification I will use is that I will alter the chapter title that I show you before. The alter title, that I will alter the chapter title using the same selector that is used by the default one, but I will define it without the pipe and will replace the dash by a dot. One really important rule when you are doing this inside your document is that if you alter a string set which is the same string set, or if you reuse an already defined string set, if you reuse the same name, make sure that you are altering the whole set of string sets defined in the same selector. In my case, I don't need to alter anything else because it's the only applied CSS at this point. But if you see that there is other rules applied on the same location, please make sure to keep the string sets you don't want to alter, because if you remove them directly from your CSS, it will remove them also from the default CSS, and you will lose those string sets in your whole document. So in my case, I just want to alter the chapter title. It's okay. I only have this one defined, but make sure that every time you have only one string set defined at one place if you want to alter it and if it's already defined. So now that I altered it, I will get back to my previous page definition, the first containing the page numbers. And now what I want is that I want the other page, which are not the first page of each chapter, to display the name of their current chapter on the left part for the left pages and on the right part for the right pages. So now I define my whole set of margins boxes, and I will have for all my pages some headers and footers. So let's transform the document and analyze inside it where are my different components. So now my PDF is generated. Now I can go, for example, on the introduction chapter. It's the first page of a chapter because it contains the chapter title, and its personal header will contain the map title, which is space exploration. And as you can see in the my document, it's a right page, so it's in the top right margin box. If we continue and enter the following chapter, the chapter 2 is the left part, so it's on a even page, it's on the top left margin box, etc., etc. If I go on a page which is not a chapter, so for example, the terrestrial planets are a subtopic of the planets chapter, I will see that it's from the chapter 3, which is called planets. And the same for the following page, which is exactly the same chapter, but we just change the side of each pages to make them being outside the page, the middle page, which sometimes can be maybe glued or something if you have to print your document. And we kept our page number, which is exactly what we wanted. And we can move to the next part. Now we will continue with metadata. So what is metadata in a DITA document? So it's useful information about your document content, your book. In our cases, for example, the author, the audience, some dates, maybe you have multiple versions, release dates, etc., etc. You can also define some keywords inside each document. The advantage of the metadata in DITA is that you can use these metadatas maybe for if you have some external tools, maybe sometimes you can have to filter your documents by maybe a date of publication, an author, maybe some, I don't know, version, if it's version 1, 2, etc. So this can be a huge advantage from, in fact, content that is not present inside the document, but it's hidden from the PDF, the final PDF, but it's visible from the whole PDF file. So the first metadata we will see in our case, it's the DITA keywords. So they can be defined within the map or the bookmap using the topic meta or the book meta elements, which are specific child elements of the map, the DITA map and the DITA bookmap. And you can also define them in the topics, in each topic, using the metadata element. A small warning though is that you cannot define the keywords in both map and topics. You have to choose if you prefer them all gathered in the map or if you want to have them on the topic they apply on. So in my case, I use the second part. I define all my keywords inside my topics. So I will show you example of my topics. As you can see, I have the metadata element having some keywords, for example, terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, which are all the planets which are detailed inside my current topic. Those keywords are not directly in my PDF document, but if I go back to my document and open, as I did before, my document properties, I will see that between all the my topics, I have quite a lot of keywords, but I will find back the terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, etc., because I define also the same for all the giant planets. Maybe my rockets are also defined here. So all this information, it's in fact included in my document, but it's not visible when I'm just browsing through the pages. Other keywords I am using in my case, and I will use them in this part as they're in my map, in my book map, but they are not keywords. They are other kind of metadata. For example, I create the author of my, which is I am the author of my own data map, and I add some critical dates, which are the date I created this book and the date I modified, and this is the date of my last modification of the document. And maybe I want this particular information to be displayed in my PDF because they can be useful. For example, if you buy a book in a shop, on most of them you will find the author, for example, and I also want to be on the front page. So to go and to succeed in this part, I will use the XPath function, which is an oxygen specific value for some CSS properties. I will detail them in my document. So the advantage of this method that is available in Oxygen CSS is that you can extract or process some pieces of information within the document because all the metadata are not displayed in the final PDF, but they are present in the document and we will find them in the merged HTML document. So we can extract them and we can also process them if we want maybe only a part of them. You can also test all the XPath rules and the XPath queries using Oxygen XPath builder. And as I said before, the .merge HTML file. So like this, you can be sure that the result obtained by the CSS will be the same you have tested. So your query, you know that your query is going well and extract only the information you want. And the other advantage of the OxyXpath function is that I can use it both in my classic CSS element rules using, for example, the element name or the class attributes. And I also can define them in my page rules if I want, for example, to display a specific piece of information in my header, for example. The only problem that you can create using the XPath function is that make sure that your XPath is optimized and don't forget to verify using the XPath builder that your query don't take long to be processed. So I will go back on my Oxygen. So what is a XPath? So I have some examples here. I have 3 of them. I will detail on this one, for example. I will and comment all of them, but I will explain for people not used to use the one and to create XPath queries. So what I want, for example, I define here in my first rule, I want my front page to display my name. As I am the author, I want to be displayed on the front page. So for this, I will use the XML, the classic XML navigation, the model, which is just a series of parent elements and child elements. And what I want to go, and I want to match this following rule. So the best for this is to go back into text mode. We can maybe format the document to make it easier to read. I will display and create, I will use the XPath builder to make easier to read, because I can also use this one, but this one is bigger and it's easier to see. So I will take my rule and run it into my document. What? I have a small problem. I have to keep it like this, sorry. So here you may see that I matched my name. So to make sure that I match my query matched my name, what I used, in fact, I simply used the name of the element contained, which contains my name, my metadata. So I simply go into all my nodes, my XML nodes, and stop in the bookmap bookmeta, because my as I show you before, here is the original definition of the content, and this is translated into some classes. We will find here the bookmeta. So I can see that now I will reach this node using this first part of my query, will reach this node, but I only want from all this node, you may see that it's bigger than needed. I just want the author. So I select a child node, simply saying that there is a slash. So it's in the continuation of my current node, which is the book meta. I select the author, which is here, and I want the text content of my node. So I simply add at the end another slash to saying that, okay, I reach my node. The next part I want to do is that to extract the text, and I will use the XPath function text. Here is the same function. No, we'll use this one and the second, sorry. I will use also the same rule, except I will modify a small part of it, because I also want to display the last revision of my document. So I will keep the beginning of my XPath query, because the information I want is in the same place. It's just here. I will select the book meta. I will go into directly, I can go using the double slash, I can jump directly onto child nodes, and I will stop onto the revised node. And from all this node, I don't want the text anymore, because as you may see, there is no text inside this element. I simply want the value of the modified attribute. So I will add at the end of my query that I want the result of my modified attribute. So this will appear again into my front page, but I used a different selector, which is the bookmap book title. If we go back in author mode, I will simply match, instead of this one, I will match again a parent node of this node, which is simply here. I will go a little down inside my hierarchy, and simply instead of matching this one, I will match this one. I could use the same selector. It was just for showing that you can match different elements. In this case, I also use the after element to not broke my content. I want it to be displayed after all my title. I also do a small display as my after is not defined. I define it as a block. I send a small font size. I set a small padding to not be too close to my title, and I will write a small content, last revision, and the result of the query, which is this date. Same here, I will write author and getting the author of the document from the metadata. And the last thing I want to do is to use something a little more complex, is that I will go back here into my XPath builder and I will match these rules. The only thing I want, in fact, are from my documents. You may have seen here that I define also some specific data, which is custom metadata, and I want it to be displayed for those two elements, two topics. I defined as a source the URL of the original document from which I take some content to be inside my document. So to make it work, I will simply go into my document, and to make it easier, I will do like this to keep the format. As you may see here, I defined some element using the topic data element, which is converted in a div, so I cannot use the div element to match my content. I will go into my topic data, so this is my first element, and I want them to be filtered in case I use different data elements. I want them to be filtered by the name because I define them using the name source. So I want them to be named source. So this is my first filter. So I want them to be filtered by the data class to have the name source. And as for the critical dates, I want to extract the value of my data metadata element. So I just want to display the URL of my source. And to make it, because I know that I have two topics matching these rules, this rule, I want my query result to be processed again by the string join method, which is simply a method which gather all the results and add them and use only the second parameter. So the first parameter is the XPath query, and the second parameter of the string join method is the separator I will use between my results. So in this case, I simply add a comma and a space. If you are not sure about any method used in XPath, Oxygen already provided a documentation for this. And you can also browse the internet directly from the W3C sites or the Saxonica documentation, which is the processor used by XPath. So now that I'm sure that my rules are okay and you see here the result, I uncommented all my documents, my rules, sorry, and I can directly process again the documents with all my rules defined. So I will have now in my document the author, the last revision of my document under the title, and also I will have some metadata that I will detail a little further again. I will continue this detail a little further, but first let's check the content. So now you have seen that I extract some metadata which is not in the content, the basic content of the document, and I simply display it inside my document. So I have my last revision and the author. So this is the first part of what I can do using the Oxy XPath function. The second part, now I want to use this a little more complicated thing, is that I define it then using a new parameter, which is as the Oxy XPath function. It's a oxygen specific rule. So these rules will not be displayed correctly inside your browser. You can match them, you can check them, but the browser will warn you that this rule cannot be applied on the web document. But on the author mode of Oxygen, you may see the final result of the Oxy XPath. Maybe some of you already seen them. That if I go back in the author mode, on the first page, I have space exploration, and I have the last revision, which is the result of the XPath function. And in this case, I don't want them to be displayed in the content, but I want them to be in some custom metadata, which are already available into my document properties, but are not, for example, keywords or author or title, which are automatically processed by the DITA to PDF processor and added automatically from the DITA map or the book map directly into the document properties. In this case, I want to be customized, and I want to create some new metadata from my document. So I create them using the Oxy PDF meta custom property, and simply ask for any kind of content, define what I want to appear as the name of the custom metadata and the value of the custom metadata. And if I go back to my document properties, I have the custom tab here, and I can already see that the date are already added as custom metadata. And here you may see my bibliography newly created custom metadata, including as my XPath result is processed by my stringjoin method, the first link, the comma space, the second link, because I only have two topics matching the rule I define here, as topic data with source. Finally, all this webinar has been made using the developer site from Mozilla. You can find a lot of explanation about CSS properties. If property is not quite understandable from its name, you can search it. It's multi-language supported. You can find all the details, some examples. The same rules can be found also in the W3 website, when we have here the third version of the CSS selectors and the properties. And I created all this webinar using part of these topics you will find in the user guide. Here you will find other examples, some other detailed use cases, some how-tos, and just simply thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions, we can answer them.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for this crash course. And let me thank all the people that joined us today for being here, and also for asking a lot of questions. So brace yourself, Julian, because we have a bunch of questions that you will have to respond. Okay, so let's start. What can I do if I want to split a procedure into two tasks, but have the output be one longer task?
I think for this one, you may have to split from the source file. I think the users the user want to do something into the original task, I think, maybe I think you should take a look over the how to split tasks. So to create, you will have, I think, to create two different DITA tasks and maybe to refer them in a bigger document if you want to use them in another bigger document using the conref attributes. And it's more like this is a more general data question. I think it's something like, if you want to split, if I understand correctly, you have to define two source files and use them in another file using the conref documents.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next one. Why does the P class have a minus sign and the code PH class have a plus?
This is also a more specific thing related to inheritance in data elements. The minus is normally, the minus is normally used by the normal, the parent structural elements like the P, the paragraph. If it's a child of one of those parents, the main elements of data, they will have normally the plus instead of the minus in their class. But normally we do not use those ones inside our selector, and this is why also we are using when we are defining the selectors, we prefer to use the class, but we also use this notation, which is the tilde equal, which in fact is only saying that I want the class to contains this part of the CSS, the class, sorry, the value to be contained only in this one. I don't want to write the whole class attribute because sometimes it can be really long. So this is why we also use this notation to not rewrite all the plus, spaces, minus. Maybe we have two different element because we have the main one. Like for the code phrase, we will have two different module and elements, and normally we do not write all the detailed class, but just the part that interests us.
Okay, this was an extensive response. So thank you for this. Let's go to the next one. For one of our audience members, page margins look very useful. Can he include it in a docbook or an XML document?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's quite default PDF processing. So either you want to do on any XML documents, if you define the page rules and some page margin boxes, Oxygen PDF Chemistry will transform them into headers and footers. This is a more general PDF processing, that only data processing.
Thank you. Is it possible to work with slightly larger images that provide bleeding for professional printing?
Yeah, I think you can, but if you use a bigger image, you can, I think now, if your image is quite bigger, in fact, I don't really know what the user means by larger, if it's larger like conventional page sizes, or if it's something like, I don't know, maybe 1 meter by 2, it's possible that PDF Chemistry can not support this kind of bleeding. So I don't know what the user exactly mean by bleeding, but I think if it's like I said before, I use an SVG file. If I want to use it on A3, A4 US letter, I can. But if the image is really huge, it's possible that PDF Chemistry does not support entirely the bleeding for these images.
Maybe he will return with an explanation.
Yeah.
Where do we define the cover page.css file definition? Is it in the template.opt file?
You are no. You in the template OPT file. In fact, you just have to mention the main, what I called here the main CSS file, which is the parent. You can only define one CSS file for the whole document, but I prefer split my CSS into multiple CSS and simply import them into my main CSS. So you can define them in main CSS or in the front page CSS. The only thing is that if you are not using the file indicated here, and so it's like a child file of the main CSS, you have to import it into the main CSS to be used by the processor. But you can do here in the main one or in any other file. It's just need to be a CSS document.
Okay, thank you. Let's jump ahead. What is the best way to deal with different languages? For example, if I want a transformation in English, one in French, and maybe one in German.
If you want it in the default transformations, the processor is looking for the language, the XML lang parameters, which can be set over the bookmap or the DITA map. And if this attribute is set on the documents, a lot of names, for example, chapters, parts, will be automatically translated by the processor into the final language, like French, German, etc. So normally you just have to explain to the default CSS that you are in another language, which is not English. And so, for example, if I want to make it French, I can go into my bookmap, go into my attributes tab, and I will find here the XML lang. If I want to use the French one, I select the XML French, and if I transform this document, the only difference is that instead of having chapter 1, chapter 2, author, and etc., I will have the same word but translated in my targeted language. And if a language is missing, you can using CSS adding the specific word you want to appear. If you want something with the DITA default transformation does not include, maybe.
Thank you. Is it possible to have mixed page geometries?
I'm not sure what the user wants, but
Page sizes, page margins, probably.
I think you can, depending on, you have quite some limitations, but you will have, in fact, the limitation is that you can use what I define here, for example, saying that I want the chapters to make something or the front page. If you cannot use these specific pages, you will have to use the output class attribute on the specific topic. If you want a topic to be landscape, for example, you will have to use an output class saying, for example, landscape, and define for the page, the specific page, that if there is the output class, in fact, you will define the page as a landscape page, as I did here. You will have to say that the page is landscape in the first selector, and add a name to the page, and says that if you match the topic with the output class, that the page will refer the name you gave here. There is a full example in the user guide saying how you can do this. I use the landscape because it's the most common, but there is a whole use case in our documentation for this.
Thank you, Julian. You have a lot of thank yous coming your way from our audience.
Thank you for being here also. The audience is part of the, without them, I cannot do those kinds of webinar.
Of course, we all agree. Well, that's about it. I want to remind our audience that if they have more questions regarding your presentation, let me take a little bit the control back. You can also use the Oxygen feedback commenting platform right on the event page. And of course, you can insert there any other comments. And let me also remind you that the event is being recorded, and you will find the recording along with all of Julian's sample files and slides on the same event page. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our upcoming events. In the weeks to come, we prepared for all of you the following webinars. Next week, we will have the Engage Everyone in the Technical Documentation Process webinar. During this event, we will see that anyone can contribute to the technical documentation with the proper collaboration tools. And the great tool that does just that is Oxygen Content Fusion. And you will see a lot of specific use cases for technical writers, subject matter experts, and even users. Also, this session will highlight some of the new additions to Content Fusion 4. On February 3rd, we will have the Working with Data in Oxygen, Advanced Profiling and Reuse Strategies webinar. And if becoming advanced in profiling and reusing data content is one of your New Year's resolutions, then you're in luck, because in this third webinar about working with data in Oxygen, we will help you achieve just that. But know that this webinar will cover some more advanced data concepts. And finally, on February 10, we will have the Transforming XML and HTML documents to PDF part 2, lists, tables, and images, where we will encounter Julian once more. Because if you watched our previous webinar on CSS customization and you want to continue your journey into defining the look and format of your documents, well, this is the second part, and in this webinar, you will learn some more advanced CSS properties, and you will apply them on more complex elements like lists, tables, and images. Julian, I got that right?
Yep, and I just want to add for all the users which are still here, that if you have some more questions, also you can ask them on the support email address. We take all the questions seriously, and we will answer all of them. If something is not clear enough, or you want and you cannot find them, for example, in our user guide, don't hesitate to ask them on support@oxygenxml.com. We are also answering on this part.
Thank you for this addition. So, reaching the end of our event, thank you again, Julian, for teaching us step by step how to use CSS for customizing our PDF publications. And also thank you, Dan, for helping us with the audience's questions in real time. Of course, a big thank you to everyone for joining us again this week. And until next time, stay safe and have a nice day or evening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.